Hey everyone, it's Matt. Welcome to session 70 of the Behavioral Observations podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by the Himalaya Podcast Player app. So if you're frustrated with the native apps that come with your Android or Apple device, you can check out the Himalaya app in the App Store and download it and give it a go. See if it works any better. I know for me, the native Apple Podcast Player is a continued source of frustration. It seems like every update that they make, it seems to get less and less functional. So I've been using the Himalaya app recently, and I really like it. And so if you want to give it a go, you can, again, just find it in the App Store, both for Android and Apple devices. And be sure to follow the Behavioral Observations podcast when you do. And this podcast is also brought to you by HRI of Colorado. Barb Voss is a recruiter who's been in this business for, almost 30 years or so. And she finds you your dream job, basically. So we'll hear more about HRI later on in the episode. But if you are looking for a job, I recommend going to hricolorado.com and click on the contact tab, connect with Barb, and she will help you out in that area. So on to today's show. My guest today is Dr. Neil Deochand, and he's an assistant professor at the University of Cincinnati. Since 2011, he's worked as a BCBA in both center-based and outpatient settings. His research interests span a wide variety of topics, including quality assurance of behavioral graphing practices, behavioral medicine, and he's interested in disseminating decision-making tools to support the professional practice of ABA. In this episode, we talk about all these areas, but also we focused on Neil's work in consumer product development. And this should be of significant interest to those of us who want to see our science applied more broadly. We also talk about Neil's interest in basic research using Planaria, which I'm embarrassed to admit, I had to Google to figure out what Planaria actually are. And if you're in the same boat as me, don't worry, we'll get to that in the course of this episode. And somehow Neil ties these very topics all together and mentions several resources and articles along the way. So if you want to track any of those down, head over to behavioralobservations.com and look for session 70 for the show notes. So I think that's it for now. So without any further ado, please enjoy this fun and wide-ranging conversation with Dr. Neil Deochand.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast, stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. Now here's your host, Matt Sikoria.
All right, Dr. Neil Deochand, we're going to do this again. For folks who don't know, of course, how would you know? We've been chatting for about 20 minutes and realized the recording was not happening. It was malfunctioning. So we'll get to redo this intro. So how you doing today?
It's going to be better. It's going to be better this time.
It's going to be better by orders of magnitude.
Oh, massively. Yeah. It's going to be huge.
Thanks for joining me today.
Believe me, it's going to be big.
Yeah.
It's going to be big.
Super.
Anyway, I have to thank you for letting me come on. Because the people you've had, Greg Hanley, Steve Hayes, Jonathan Tarbucks, Jim Moore, Aaron Rasmussen, you've got some very cool people. So I'm humbled to even be in, the podcast at all. So
the pleasure's mine. And we've got quite a few diverse array of topics because you've done some cool work, talking about things in the realm of visual analysis, even things like working.
You mean the boring graphing stuff is what I like to call it.
Yeah, the boring graphing stuff. Yeah, working with worms, which will make sense in a little while, I think, once we come around to that topic. And one of the things that's really, really cool is you've done a lot of work with using music to influence athletic performance. So we're going to try to tie all that together in a nice little bow if we're successful at this. But before we get to that, tell us a little bit about how you got into behavior analysis.
Yeah. So the accent you guys are probably hearing, I'm from England. I didn't kill a person and steal their accent. I was born in England for 80 years and spent some time there. And my parents just kind of shipped me off over to America. They got their green card. They were ready to get some sun in Miami. And they said, Neil, you got to university somewhere, and so they sent me off to University of Florida, close enough to keep an eye on me, but not close enough for me to have my freedom. But over in England, I went to a school like Harry Potter, but was without the wizardry. So I was a prefect naturally. I have the tie still because I could be a hoarder, and it was a cool experience. But it kind of jaded me coming across because I went from essay questions to like multiple choice, and I was really like shocked about like this change in style. So I didn't study hard. I was just kind of floating through, and somehow I managed to stumble across a University of Florida. It's not a somehow. At one point, you're gonna find behavior analysis, I feel, or you're gonna hear about it, or you're gonna be tempted to take a psychology course. And I took a class with Claire St. Peter, who's very big in the world. She's at West Virginia University, prolific, publishes a lot. I don't know how she does it. I can't fathom, but she was my intro teacher, and she didn't say she was a behavior analyst. She basically just taught all the schools. I thought she taught them very fairly, but there was one that stood out and seemed to make sense, and has since from then. And after that course, I continued to try to take classes. I took a class with Glenn Sizemore, who told me I had no free will, and I saw that it upset some people in the class, but I was like, yeah, no free will, that's cool. I like that. Determinism, yeah. What's the point in doing things if you can't study them and make sense of stuff? Let's have that as our faith assumption. And then we moved. I believe in free will in the sense that it feels good to believe it, but besides that, I don't believe I can make something come from nothing. That's like Big Bang stuff, and I'm not that egocentric. I am really egocentric, but not that. But anyway, so I took the last Hank Pennypacker course on strategies and tactics, and he ended up being, well, I didn't know at the time, but he would be my academic granddad because he was the mentor to my mentor, Wayne Fuquay, when I went over to Western. And that strategies and tactics course was really cool. It talked about how do you bring behavioral technology into the marketplace. He's got a company called MammaCare, and that company does some really amazing stuff in terms of tumor and breast cancer detection. But the process is really inventive because people don't know the sophistication or sensory sophistication of their hands, and people could be trained to detect a millimeter-sized tumor, which is actually better than some ultrasound technology. And if you're in early stages, it's so much safer for someone to be detected earlier, and our life success or outcomes are much higher. So he showed that his technique was really cool. It works. But he had to go to industry to make real mammary glands, real breasts that felt real, so that people could train with them, and that could be a tumor or simulated tumor that would simulate what a real tumor could look like, could be trained for an individual to detect from successfully larger sizes to smaller sizes down to a millimeter. And there was so much resistance. And one thing that I think behavior analysis as a field that people know the history with education, the history that behavior analysis has been vilified in some ways. You're robotic, you're blah blah blah. It's so hard, even when you have really cool technology, sometimes to get it out there and get it disseminated, because you get even the American Cancer Institutes might fight it because they say that their technique with their hand movement that they suggest is superior. And so I think that knowing that you try to figure out what is the disconnect between like the public and like what we're doing. Like our language is not very friendly. I think there's a paper on the acceptability of behavioral terms by Bereck and Critchfield and Reed. It shows like some of the terms we use aren't super friendly and can make people not want to work with us. When I was listening to your interview with Steve Hayes, I think he said something really cool. It was, if I remember correctly, behavior analysis is too important for it to get in the way of where behavior analysis needs to go. And that's exactly how I feel about like industry and behavior analysis. Like if you play Halo and you find out that VR schedules are used, or interlocking schedules are used, or conjugate whatever are used, you don't care. You just want to shoot the Covenant, blow some heads up and have some fun. But if you put that on the box, like made in behavior analysis ABA land, it's gonna be like, well, what's this? What's this jargon?
Sure.
I'm not sure I want to play Halo. Have you played Halo?
No, I know of it.
What?
I know.
What did you do during graduate school? Like did you work? That was a mistake.
I'm a little bit older than you.
You look very young.
Thank you. Yeah. Your flattery will get you everywhere, Neil.
Yes.
But when I was in graduate school, it wasn't quite Pong level of sophistication. It was a little better than that. But it was.
Oh, get out of here, Pong.
Yeah.
I had a Spectrum Sinclair, 128 kilobytes when I was like 12.
I see.
So.
I see. Yeah. I got into video games there was a couple of games I played very intensely for short periods of time. And then I think if I went down that dark rabbit hole, because I have a tendency to kind of get into things, I probably would be, sleeping under a bridge somewhere.
That's amazing. It's terrifying, but also really exciting.
Yeah. I mean, there was a couple of games I was into, but once I beat them, then it was like, all right, well, and then so anyway, yeah, I'm not a huge gamer. Games are big in our household, though. I have a 10, 12, and 14-year-old, and so.
Told me they like Fortnite.
Yeah, Fortnite is the thing right now, and I watch them play it, and man, there's some behavioral engineering behind that for sure.
Yeah.
Crack for 12-year-olds. It's unfreaking believable. Trying to, the thing. This is a total aside, and the non-gamer.
Oh, that's fine. I took us there. It's pretty late, so like and when the time gets like to the late points, I will have a tendency to digress.
Yeah. Well, in Fortnite. Well, I guess it's probably not that different than a lot of other video games, but like we'll try to say to one of our kids, especially my middle guy who's the most addicted to it, I suppose, and we'll be like, okay, dinner's going to be in 10 minutes. How much longer is this going to take? He's like, well, I can't tell you, and he gets all angry and stuff like that. It probably just speaks to like the variable schedule that is operating on those things, and it's unbelievable. So anyway, so you've foreshadowed a lot of cool stuff, especially about this kind of early interest in the marriage of technology and industry with our behavioral science. So you're at UF. You kind of discovered behavior analysis. You took you had the opportunity to take classes from these, kind of world-class luminaries in our field. Pick it up from there. What happened, when you wrapped up your undergraduate degree?
So, like I had Indian parents. They wanted me to go to grad school, and they for them success was like just get in, get out, So I was trying to find a master's program that was really quick, like just get it done in a year kind of thing, and then had the word behavior in it. And so I found something that looked cool. It was at UF. It was health, education, and behavior. And slowly realized that just because it has the word behavior in it doesn't mean that they study behavior. And so I was learning how to do like survey tools, statistical stuff like factor analyses, tool creation. And I found that we weren't actually necessarily changing people's behavior. We might do like a health ed thing on like healthy eating or how to avoid like carcinogenic stuff, and then do a survey pre and post, and like someone said, yes, that training was very beneficial, thank you, or it lead the person to report that they had some beneficial outcomes from the training, but there was no like after post evaluation, no behavioral tracking, and I was a little kind of worried that I'd kind of wasted my time. But I remembered I'd taken behavioral courses. I was at UF still, and I was okay. Well, I'm going to take some behavior analysis courses in the graduate program, and I ended up taking like classes with Mark Branch, Tim Ballmer, like Clive Wynn, Jesse Dowry, some of the big names over there. And I was just like almost auditing those classes because I wasn't in the program and I was kind of an outsider. I still had a lot of non-behavioralese kind of terminology. I was calling for statistical stuff for no reason. And I was still not working as hard as I should have been working, especially if I was like really interested in the field. but yeah, so I was kind of dragging the group down. If you would like look at an interdependent contingency, I was like dragging everyone's education down in that classroom, because it was like, but what about the stats? What about the meta-analyses? How's that going to help? Let's just figure out self-injury across all the disorders, and that will inform us that Lesch-Nyhan has the most. What does it do? Nothing. Like you don't get much bang for your buck out of that. So I do think, though, when we talk about like the marketplace and we talk about sampling outside the field, there are things that are done with surveys that can be very useful. So when they come from the right place and right kind of theoretical orientation, purpose behind them, they're just tools. Surveys are just tools.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's a tool, and if there's a particular use for that tool, then it's good to know how to use it.
Exactly. Like I think a lot of people know that our language is a bit caustic to the ears of like the layman and the public, and like the deterministic kind of stripping of free will can be very upsetting for people, very like a kind of enormous emotional reaction. And like there's a paper called On the Social Acceptability of Behavior Analytic Terms. It's a crowdsourced paper that kind of looks at demographics and disciplines outside of behavior analysis and their reactions to words like chaining, words like negative reinforcement, positive punishment, negative punishment, that kind of stuff, and then samples an alternative. So it's not just a survey; it just says, "Hey, what could I use instead of like extinction? What could I use instead of chaining?" And there was some really cool like data that they presented. Like instead of chaining, someone could say teaching a sequence of responses, or escape extinction could be follow through training. And it doesn't really like jeopardize the procedural meaning, because you could have two different lingos for talking to a person, like a parent, because we know we're not supposed to use jargon, but how are we supposed to kind of express our terms? That's a good place for a survey to kind of sample and get out of the bubble. Single subject designs are great. They're great tools. They're powerful, but it doesn't tell us our bang for our buck like multi-tiered interventions do. It tells us the cost benefit analysis per person and in a larger scheme of things. So, I think there's like everything is a tool. There's power in both designs, but they just have to be used. But by looking at the reasons why people do them, like when you're a faculty member, if someone's trying to get tenure and they're just pumping out publications, that's not necessarily the framework for academic integrity of your papers, right? So, you've got to look at what's motivating the researcher, what's motivating the theoretical framework. Is you can pump out loads of surveys and never have anything behavioral that ends up contributing or helping people. But I'm probably digressing now.
That's okay. No, it's a good point, especially in terms of identifying those replacement terms. What's the functionally equivalent response if we're not going to use things like differential reinforcement or things like that has been suggested that wakes people out. So so you ended up going to Western Michigan.
Yep. After I like kind of did my master's program, I got my BSBA, got some experience with actually doing some exercise research over in a Prader-Willi syndrome facility, where we were keeping people on keeping the adults and kids on exercise bikes and recumbent bikes and on treadmills. They earned tokens that they could earn some 0-calorie drinks, and then we made sure that they were not food stealing. And then after that, I went over to do some work over in Miami, kind of acquisition stuff, and then went to Tampa, where I did some quality assurance work for Agency for Persons with Disabilities. And a lot of that was just like making sure people's graphs reflected the needs of like what they were being requested for behavioral services and authorizations. And so Matt Costello, who I'd met in the Strategies and Tactics class, which was a really cool class. Actually, we all pitched together and got Hank a engraved pocket watch. I should have got him a mechanical movement, but it was just a quartz movement. But we did get it engraved, and it said "Teaching Excellence," and it had his name on it. And so we met there, and we kept in contact. And he said, you need to come back to do your PhD. Come up to Western, do your PhD. And I applied. I went to Wayne Fuquay's lab, the behavioral medicine lab, and it was a really rewarding experience. Again, like from UF to Western, there are a lot of important people, Al Poling, Ron Van Alten, Wayne Fuquay, Stephanie Peterson, Cynthia Petras. These are all big people, all of them. And what's cool about Western and the university has like a really collaborative clinical OBM and behavior analytic departments. So they were all behavioral. Like that's a rare event when you get OBM that's behavioral, when you get clinical that's behavioral, and you get behavioral that's behavioral. That should be behavioral. Right. All in one place. There's a couple places like that. I think you've got some stuff in Nevada, and you've got like University of North Carolina, Wilmington. But it's rare when you've got the EABers together and the ABAers together, the clinical together, OBMers. So you've got this melting pot of just behavioral ideas. It's like someone can't do parent training or isn't getting buy-in with a group. The OBMer can take over. Oh, I need some help with some clinical issues as well that I'm having on top of my behavioral issues. And you've just got some great staff on the clinical faculty. Scott Gaynor, Dr. Spates has left. There's so many cool people that are doing so many different things. So went over to Wayne's lab, and Wayne was like, "Hey, Neil, you need to pick up your bricks and make sure you're not doing what you did over at UF, which is kind of dossing around and just floating through." And I was like, "Yes, sir. Just gotta make sure I get my grades and do my stuff." So I started.
So your reputation preceded you?
My reputation. So yes, here's another thing. So here's a hint for people coming to the field. If you don't work hard at one point in your life, people will know, and that might be how you remember for the rest of your life. If you keep on doing what you keep on, what you've been doing in the past. So it did precede me, and I'm not embarrassed to say it was true. I wasn't working hard, and that becomes a problem. Or if you really feel passionate about something, you've got to start doing things differently. And so I started trying to think about what I wanted to do at Western, and one of the things was I reverse engineered the PhD program. The thing is, I hate I'm very counter control. I hate order. I hate people telling me this is the course sequence you got to take. This is what you got to do. So I try to reverse engineer what I thought a PhD was, and it was completely the opposite of what everyone else was doing, which made me very happy. I said my PhD, if it's not related to my thesis, has to be 4 years long, and so I have to start my dissertation now. The thesis, I can wait. I could do that quicker in 2 years. So I started on the dissertation work, which was, I was really interested in conjugate schedules, which are, you could probably give, if you want to break up my voice, it's British accent. What is a conjugate schedule, Matt?
And our first go around with this, you gave such a nice description of it, but it's basically there's feedback involved, right? And so the more you respond, the more that provides, that changes the stimulus properties of the environment you're responding in.
Yeah, by some order of magnitude or in the response class, and the stimulus is changing proportionally. And it's been dubbed one of the most fundamental schedules. It's not got a huge ton of work. We've got more work on interlocking schedules and very complex schedules, but this is just such an intuitive one that works with kids that are nonverbal at the early ages, before language, 0 to 6 months, it's functional. It's being used for assessing audio preferences. It's been used for checking dyadic feedback and supervision, because you don't know if someone's just listening unless they have an active, say they're clicking a button to hear on a headset what the person is saying. You can actually do kind of a check on people, where are they dipping off in their listening and their supervision, and that's almost like a market. Yeah, you can see where people dip off. Maybe when the critical feedback happens, it's stop pressing now.
They're thinking about Halo. Are you looking for a new job, but you're overwhelmed with all the emails that you're getting from various ABA agencies? What if there was someone who was in your corner and could help you find the perfect job placement? Well, that person exists. Barbara Voss has been working as a recruiter for over 30 years, and her company, HRIC, specializes in placing BCBAs in permanent full-time positions throughout the United States. Barbara has been placing BCBAs since 2011, so she knows our business, and she offers personalized service to any BCBA looking for a new position. She also helps companies looking to hire BCBAs too. Here are just some of the things Barbara can help you with. She can provide information about salary ranges in different markets across the country. She can help you write your resume. She can coordinate and prepare you for the interview process, and even help negotiate the right salary for you. And best of all, there are no charges to any candidate for all of these services. When you're ready to make a change and want to work with someone who will listen to you and understand what you need in a new position, contact Barbara at HRIC. To schedule a confidential discussion, head over to hricolorado.com. Again, that's hricolorado.com, and hit the contact button to connect with Barbara. You won't be disappointed.
Yeah, think about Halo, how to be a lazy student. And that's a constant struggle. Like, my theory was that's
what I was doing when you're asking about conjugate schedules.
Yeah. This is what I thought. Like, if I worked hard enough, I'd be able to escape work and do less work. But then I worked hard enough where I started enjoying work. It's kind of the ACT stuff. I expose myself so much where I've got like transformational stimulus function, where now no longer am escape orientated. I'm actually really enjoying more work, which is funny. So I reverse engineered my idea of what a PhD was, because again, everyone's PhD program is very different. And it's kind of silly when people say like, oh, you completed it in 4 years, 3 years, 2 years. That was kind of how my parents viewed success. And that's a silly way, because that's about what you learn, what you gain from the experience. And life is not going to be a series of equal numbers. Not 1 year is equal to the next, and so on. It's just kind of like a conjugate preparation. So I started getting some engineers. I recruited some engineers to make a punching bag that measured the force of punches and the frequency of punches. We did it with accelerometers, and we had, I think Wayne was really nice and gave us $850 to like kind of get that project started, get some salaries for these engineers. And it's not a whole lot of money, but we were able to get these guys to build like a vectored punching bag. I had 2 accelerometers at the top, accelerometer at the bottom. There's 3 axes, and then we had a way to stop the bag from spinning, which would inflate the score of the force of the punch. Because if you add any extra vectors, it would actually increase the reading. So we had to keep a way to make it have integrity. Did a bunch of pilots rounds before I ended up doing my dissertation, and so then I decided, like, once I got the engineers were making it, I started doing my thesis, which was on graphing practices and trying to build like graphing skills and some kind of cool tricks to make sure that we don't draw in our graphs anymore. So if you got
whoa. Let's back up to I want to get to the graphing stuff, because that I know you've written a lot on that, but getting back to the punching bag thing, what was the interest in? Do you have a background in boxing, or are you a fan of it, or like why, or did that match the concept? In other words, the act of boxing. What's that?
I like boxing. Like it was like when I wrote my dissertation, I had to like write a bunch of reasons why we chose boxing. He's like, well, some people could have knee problems, or some people might, it's both good for cardio and it's good for building muscles. So, but the reason I chose it was I was interested in boxing. I like the boxing gym style of workout. You go from skipping a rope, maybe doing some press-ups, to shadow boxing, because you don't want to hurt yourself. You want to make sure that you're going lighter, and then going into a light bag. Then we're doing the speed bag, which is the one that you see in Rocky, the one that you punch it and it bounces back, and that helps you get your speed up. And then you've got an accuracy bag. Most people don't actually see that one, and that is it's like an elastic a ball in the middle with 2 elastic lines going up and down.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about.
You punch that thing, and it's like a shadow. You do not know where it is, right? So you've got to, like, that one is all about, you need to fine tune your ability to see like a shadow warrior attacking you. And then like there's also an uppercut bag, which is basically a bag that hangs very high, not like the cylinder bags, the heavy bags or the light bags, and it's kind of just for uppercut. So there is a space to just punch it upwards, because you're not really supposed to uppercut the heavy bags that you see, the like kind of cylinder workout bags. Mm-hmm. They're not for uppercuts, they're for like jabs, side punches. So I looked at the workout on the punching level. I've been at some boxing gyms. I never really liked sparring because I was investing in my brain at the time, and I was thinking like this could be a tragedy waiting to happen. I do stupid stuff with my head already. I'm just lucky enough to like lose all the information I learned. So right. I pretty much stayed within the safety of non-sparring and Wii boxing.
Wii boxing, yeah. The video game emerges again. Yeah.
Yeah. You see, you know what I do in my spare time when I'm not being a good father. There's some level of like, some video gaming intruding with my values of being a good father.
For sure.
But so that was kind of the boxing reason. But we ended up getting a patent. So Wayne was like, hey, Neil, this is something that's seems pretty inventive. You need to go ahead and see if you can see if this has got some intellectual property behind it. So I went off to the patenting office, and getting a patent is a forever mission, and it took a long time actually. But we ended up getting a pending patent, and then I ended up getting a grant for $15,000, and I ended up putting together a team with an OBM student, Dale Gregory, and Wayne Fukuoka, and we made this team together to figure out like where else does this preparation, this music adjusting with performance, occur? Can it work for runners? Can it work for other machines like rowing machines? And so we did what in the business world is called a customer discovery round. And we go to gyms, we go find out people that work out and say, hey, look, what are you using? You don't taint the interview by saying, look, I have music that changes. You like this? And they go, yes. And you go, would you like to use our new Audiovate as our company? We've got this great technology. It changes in proportion. It tells you when you're working out really hard and when you're slowing down. So would you like to use this? And they say yes. So that's an example of doing all the wrong things in customer discovery. Tainting the interview with what you want to hear, going to yes and no questions. Instead, you're supposed to go in and say, hey, tell me about your workout. What do you do? What devices are you using? What do you like about them? What don't you like about them? And so we went to runners, we went to boxing gyms, and we started like kind of shifting our perspective from boxing. It's a smaller market. It's a lot of them have trainers already, and wearing headphones is not going to work for them. And then in gyms, you can't just it's going to be lots of people listening at once. So it just didn't seem like a good fit. But it was good. It was good for my dissertation because I ended up getting some good data. But we ended up looking at runners next, and we kept on hearing two really interesting stories. One of the stories involved runners that were going back to a run from like a timeout, like from having lost their workout schedule, and just like burning out, not knowing their capabilities, and then just not wanting to run again. And so they wanted a way to like know when they're running too fast. And then we heard a similar story of some people that were training for a marathon that were really, really athletic. And they said that sometimes I run just too fast in the excitement for the real thing compared to the training. And then I don't get my personal best because I burnt out so hard. And these are like kind of two different like groupings that are saying we want a way to hear when we're running too fast. And the issue they were facing was nothing was real time. They were saying that I use my Garmin watch, but it tells me every mile. But once I did it 5 miles in a row, it was too late. I'd already like kind of gone too fast and it messed me up. And then some people were saying that verbal feedback was kind of bothering them or getting intrusive. And, if you look at like what, when you look at Steve Hayes and how we're thinking machines, everyone could perceive like verbal feedback completely differently. But someone might not be like to want to be told what to do. Someone might like the tone of the Android voice or whatever. So there's embedded like stimuli in like the verbal world that doesn't necessarily track onto the music. So it doesn't go through like the same processes. So we're thinking maybe it's a more automatic way to provide real-time feedback, telling a person when they might need to slow down if they're going too fast, or tell them to speed up when they're going too slow. And we also heard the other story was that some people who work out and just want to convince themselves at the end that they're running faster, but they're running slower, they do like a little bit of mental gymnastics and, lie to themselves about being faster than they are when they're going slower. So we thought, we started saying, hey, we've got something here. And actually, I just got a grant for about 120,000 recently to
Wow, nice.
build up. Yeah. It's a very lucky, it's through the Venture Lab at UC. And they gave me this money and they said, hey, look, you need to go to market now because you've got your MVP, which is minimal viable product. You need to make a beta and then you need to make a go-to-market product. And, the guy I'm working with is he doesn't care about behavior analysis. I've got a new guy who's, the team is basically at this point, everyone's going on to do their different things, right? Because some people are trying to make a family and move on. And this person's he's a marketer and he's look, he's done this stuff before, but they don't care about the jargon. They don't care about behavior analysis. So I said the Steve Hayes quote, right? Behavior analysis is too important for behavior analysis to get in the way of where it needs to go. And that's exactly how I feel about products and, our terms. And we need to make sure that we're protected and other fields aren't just coming in saying they're doing something else that is behavior analysis. I said in a previous interview with Ryan O'Donnell, yeah, sure. That he was I wanted to do a pretty similar interview about this stuff. And I said, I quoted Sidman, data is fickle, good data is fickle. That just means that behavior analysis can be repackaged, and sold under a different, thing with just a little bit extra.
Oh, Pat Fryman talks about that all the time. What's the example he uses? A lot of developmental or clinical psychologists will, talk about parent-child interaction training, right? And it's a very, very popular intervention, but it's all based on, fundamental behavioral concepts. And he's like, we should be owning this stuff, but they've figured out a way to package it in terms that are more acceptable to the population.
Yeah, I think CBT is a great example. So is ACT and so is DBT. Acceptance commitment therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, they say they're linked to behavior analysis and, but they don't want to kind of advertise that too loudly, for good reason. And actually, an interesting point, Wayne Figo, so my mentor, he asked Steve Ragazzi, who's a school psychologist over in Kalamazoo, who's been very, very successful implementing token economies in school settings across the Kalamazoo region. And so Wayne said, how did you get in buy-in? And he said, I just didn't say I was a behavior analyst. That's not a big sacrifice to get that impact. That's not, I didn't say I was a behavior analyst and you got behavior analysis.
Wow.
I find that very a powerful story, even though it's just a simple kind of deal. Now, it's not false advertising, but if someone doesn't want to hear that, if you already know a priori that your audience doesn't give a hoot about where it comes from, or worse, if they heard it was ABA, would be really upset, then maybe there's another way to talk about it.
Sure. As we're recording this, the aforementioned Jim Moore is up in New England, and he's doing a 2-day peak training about an hour from where I live right now. And there's some anti-ABA folks who are kind of cajoled to attend, and so his task is to speak in general enough terms to kind of win those people over. I think he's up to the challenge because he's a great communicator. But it does highlight the need to talk in a way that makes sense to people who don't live and breathe this stuff like we do.
Yeah, and it's scary, the ABA is growing so fast, and there are going to be bad experiences, right? For whatever reasons, I remember a class in behavior at University of Florida where it started off with "I don't have free will." I liked it. I was kind of thrilled by it because I've always, I feel like it's like a dirty secret, But some people were visibly upset, and you almost get a sampling bias by who can handle that kind of notion, that determinism is going to be one of our assumptions. We're going to try to be parsimonious stuff so that we get down to the nitty gritty of what's functional. And so I think we got to be very wary of the history. And as I love Deochand, I love what he's doing with the BACB, and like I feel bad for him because he gets a lot of flack sometimes when people like saying it's just autism. I was like, thank you. That's one good thing that we can say. We're succeeding somewhere. Now let's do more. He's not opposed to doing more, but the danger is that we just get lumped into like looking at just autism, and we're not getting a sampling of like where we can fit elsewhere. But I think we've got huge technology. If we are doing something with promoting verbal behavior in an area where we're never going to be successful. Chomsky proved that verbal behavior that generative grammar is functional. All this stuff is working. How is it that we come back in autism, where there's language delays, social delays, and other behavioral deficits that we are being very successful with, where other groups are not being successful with? So, I think it stands to the testament that behavior analysis should be seeking kind of allies in areas where there have been other, I guess I would call them scientific failures, the failure for not necessarily replication, but the failure for recognition of functional variables at work. And I think that that's why I did the worm stuff, because the reason why I did the worm stuff is because the whole thing has a lot of paradoxes, controversies, and big contention in that area. It's cool. I can go into it if you want.
I do want you to go into it. I think we talked about your app and what it does very, very quickly. So I want to just return to that really quick. So what does the app do more specifically? So let's say I woke up tomorrow and decided I was going to run. I hate running.
Oh yeah, me too.
With a passion, I mean, yeah. I'll ride a bike. Love riding bikes. I love other forms of exercise. Hate running, but let's just say for the sake of argument, I'm a runner. I have your app. Mm-hmm. What does it do?
You got my app. We're not in the store, so I don't know how you got it. But
that's right.
Yeah, you say you got it. Say you got our beta. You'd be really disappointed with it. Oh no, our minimal viable product.
All right. So let's say I've gotten over my disappointment. Right. It's on my phone.
Okay, so our app, we with the 15,000, we got an app, we got a running shoe. The running shoe kind of measured the force of the impact on the ground. And the idea was that if you land pretty hard, based on baseline data, that it would lower the volume so that you wouldn't be able to hear your music. So that was the idea. But it's a bit very glitchy. If you're running, you take your baseline, it gets your running speed. If you run below your baseline, it will start slowing down, but start slowing down proportionally in terms of how far you get away from your goal every second, right? So if your goal was making maybe a 10-minute mile, you start running like an 11-minute mile, the music will play slower to let you know basically you need to pick it up. If you want your music to play normally,
and does it play would it play my music. Choice of music? Okay, all right. Yep. And so it would sound
books, everything.
So is it the idea that if you want if it's a familiar playlist, that if you want it to sound right, you gotta stay on your chosen pace.
Yeah,
and if you run too fast, it'll sound like the Chipmunks.
We actually took care of the pitch amplification through speed. So usually when you do a speed compression, you get some pitch. You'll get pitch change as well. But what we did was he basically capped how fast it would go and how slow it would go to take care of that issue. So my punching bag research, though, on the other hand, it would sound like it sounded pretty chipmunky for. We actually reversed the direction. So if you punched too slowly, it started speeding up, and we just did, that one was $850. Whatever the engineers said they could do and what we wanted were just two different imageries of I had to graduate, so they say, hey, look, it's a lot easier for us to speed this up, and it's a lot easier for us to do this by time and simulate a conjugate preparation, whereas we check how far it is. It's not actually how far away it is from the goal. So my punching bag was like a simulated conjugate stuff, and the app we've got currently is basically, because it's the real deal in terms of conjugate preparation. And then the 115,000, or who knows what we're going to be doing next with it. But like, for those in the field that are researchers, like entrepreneurial grants are way easier to get. SBIR funds and like
what funds?
So it's SBIR funds. I have to look up what it means, but like I remember like Don Hantula, he's done some stuff with them, and he was able to get that funding sourced for basically making adaptive learning for discrete trial tasks, so that like clinicians can basically augment their tasks based on responses. So like if they make a failure here, you can switch different learning objectives around, and it's almost like adaptive learning within, but it's all automated. So it's like you can be really fluent really quick without having like to like look at your notes. And so yeah, he that's basically something he patented, and I was like really interested in that stuff because it was like, well, someone else is doing going this route. And when I was doing like research grants, like the payout is just, it's so rough. I don't know how people get them. I think they're like the people in the R1 or institutions that are like fighting for $1 million grants. I don't know how they do it, because these like the competition is so high for NSF and NIH grants. But the entrepreneurial stuff is like, yeah, is it going to work? Might work. Let's do it. It just seems so much more lax and
it's
exciting.
Like the Shark Tank.
Yeah, like they're like, yeah, I think it's a good idea. Let's do it. It's like, dude, I just convinced the one dude, and he's in, and now we've got funding. The best.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
What do we need as a field to kind of teach up and coming students about this stuff? I get back to the conversations that you were describing about how to talk to potential customers to kind of find their, as the business people say, their pain points.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You go, hey, what would make this great? What would make the workout perfect? What is something you're currently dissatisfied with? And you'll hear people saying, looking at my watch to see where I'm at, looking at a timer takes me off task. It's diverted attention. I don't like this. And so you ask them kind of the pivot questions. And I think Greg Hanley, in his like interviews questions, he has some really cool questions too, are very similar, which are like, if you want to get the behavior to happen, and I was going to give you $1 million to do it, what would you need to do? And if you needed to stop it, what would you do? If I was to give you $1 million, what would you do? And parents answer that question completely differently. I've done the QABF, I've done questions about behavioral function, done the MAST, done the FAST, they sometimes really get confused with topography. They go back and forth between what they're, it just becomes this stay on task thing, and having to like basically educate them about what we're trying to talk about. And it sometimes it's it's a bit dysfunctional in terms of like getting, core quality interview data. But those two questions that he has, they really do a good job. And so it's finding the way to ask questions, I guess, in different ways that kind of feel the person's world and perspective out, allows you to dig deeper without kind of tainting or pushing them to answer the way you want. Active listening without being pushy, basically.
I see. Yeah, and again, it does kind of remind me of when you're describing a parent interview, especially if you're working with a parent and their child has a repertoire of challenging behaviors. I love the $1 million on the table, make it stop, turn it, et cetera. Yeah. But also like, what is the one behavior you want to work on? Like I might think the chief problem behavior and the one that would make most sense would be one thing, but the parent really wants the kid to stop doing this other thing, and that's most valuable to them, Yep. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of return to that real quickly. So
thanks for keeping me on task, because I can it's late, we're at 9 p.m. and I will bounce. This is one great thing about Wayne was he was able to rein me in and keep me from like bouncing off the walls and, being a nutcase instead of like being on task. So thank you for helping.
No
Thank you for the props.
Well, I was the one that kind of took you off the test because we were starting to transition to, you're going to somehow tie this into working with worms. I don't know how you're going to do it, but let's hear it.
Wayne didn't want me to do it, but he gave me this advice. Look, Neil, you've done this graphing stuff. Do you want to be known as Mr. Excel, like, the graphing guy? And I was like, I had these, like, I guess, like, dreams and, of like nightmares of people like, this is the guy that just does graphing. And so like, I was like,
he's got some sick macros.
Yeah, I did some macros. I've done some stuff to like make. I basically try to make graphing was awful. I hated it, and so I just try to find ways. There's all escape avoidance stuff. How do I make it so that you don't have to draw your phase change line in? How do you do it so that your phase label is automatically put in the graph with the phase change line, and it's all free templates I've given out on behavior analysis and practice. So we can probably put a link to those so people can access them. I think there's a couple, the couple issues with them, but the other thing I did was make a macro to make sure you can do your date ranges for progress reports and for insurance companies that need just like 3 months here, next 3 months, or they need it in quarterly amounts. So I did that because like we've all been behavior techs. I mean, if you're really, really old in the field, you've never been a behavior tech. But almost every one of us at one point like had to graph data, and Excel was not working with us. Now, not everyone has Prism, not everyone has SigmaPlot, not everyone has Statistica and all these other SPSS, Minitab, all these beautiful software pieces. But Excel is very versatile. I also you can do geocoded video data with it. I mean, you can do Power Maps, Power View. You could do some cool stuff. You can program it. You can't do those in other fields. I've been able to make with Stephanie Peterson and Becky Elridge over in West Michigan. We made a risk assessment tool for evaluating risk in a quantitative fashion for functional analyses. So like, should you go ahead, or should you try to choose an alternative? And how do you mitigate risk? So we did that all with Excel, and we chose Excel, not because we thought it was the best thing to do. We just thought that everyone in the field's using it, and we want to give this tool out of, we're working on a paper right now to write this up and disseminate this tool so that as a teaching tool to people to learn how to reduce risk if they haven't. Because right now we've already had some surveys out where less than 25% are using that amazing tool. And it could be because the agency's against it. It could be because of time issues. They think it's time issues, but Greg's already proved that time shouldn't be a factor. So we need that tool to be used effectively. And if people are over evaluating risk when they could be using latency, trial-based, or brief or single function FAs or ISCAs, then that needs to be addressed. So Excel it's got some quirks. It's a tool, stats. It's a tool, I won't say null hypothesis testing is a great thing, but confidence intervals are great, Matt Costello, who's basically we have done a lot of work with, he's come up with a really cool statistical measure of effect size. It's called ratio distance, and it's Cohen's D was always designed for group studies and never had single subject studies in mind. Well, he's made a ratio distance, which is a very cool tool that kind of takes out the caveats of Cohen's D for single subject designs. So, people that think that you don't have to have stats in behavior analysis are kind of off, because there's percentage and overlapping data. There's a lot of things to say your intervention works, in addition to looking at trend, variability, and level change, all the good stuff.
What are your thoughts on the standard acceleration chart?
It's the best graph in the world, undoubtedly.
Okay.
I don't use it because none of my students are needing to train with it, because I teach online students, which it's a challenge, but also so rewarding because we've got such a diverse student base. Like when you teach online, you are encountering students that are moms, that are working 2 jobs or working night shifts. So it's like again, we've got this marketing difference that I would never experience, like would be face to face. The changeover to doing it was weird, but like you look at that graph, I look at it and just like it's mesmerizing. And it's done. It's capped. They've got the Precision Teaching Society. They've been doing it. They've got their own convention. It's got hardened people in Chicago using it. So it's not going anywhere, and it's a great graph. If engineers like it, you can't be half wrong.
Right.
Yeah. It's a beautiful graph. I mean, it's the best graph for meta-analyses and single subject data. Like, if we had that in every graph, that would make the reviews between papers substantially easier. I
see. Okay, because I was just curious because I know you've written some papers on visual analysis and things like that. And I'm going to confess that I haven't had a chance to go look them up before our conversation. But
what the hell, Matt?
I know. I'm a bad.
You haven't read my boring graph papers.
That's right.
Right. You know what's funny? They're highly read, and I there are other papers that I've done that like you can't pick and choose what gets read. I don't know what people want, but people read the crap out of the graphing paper. And I'm like, why? It's so boring. I feel bad for putting you through it.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure a lot of them are probably students who are in that section of their coursework or something like that, and they want to make sure their graphs are right and they're they can. But yeah, so I was just curious what your perspective on that was, given all the work that you've done about how to interpret equal interval graphs. And we've got this alternative that is has all those attributes that you just rattled off.
Yeah, I did a little ditty. It's called Chart Language, and I think it had some fun phrasing. It was like one man's chart junk could be another man's chart treasure, which is chart junk is a term I've stolen. It's either like Tukey or I don't know. Anyway, it'll come to me. But like the thing that's funny in that paper, like there are a couple of issues with like our graphs, like how many targets are you putting on, how much overlap is on the graph, are you raising the zero, when do you raise the zero? If you've got a lot of zero values, you don't want that to obscure your x-axis, do you? So you don't want to make it so that it's difficult to read your data. So you might not have to, like, even like bar graphs, right? If they are absent, a raised zero value for a bar graph tells you that there was a zero value rather than there was no data. So like there's these cool things that like you can do and figure out. So the paper is Chart Languages and Behavioral Analysis, Research and Practice, and it's a nod off to Greenspoon's data language that he termed for like basically how do you create an operational definition. And in that thing, it's only 850 words, and we talk about some of the issues of graphing. And when do you use transparency? When do you jitter? Is the jittering a good idea? Like I think what we did was do a quick survey, and we said like out of these solutions, there are 5 solutions. You change a data point, you jitter it, you use transparency, you change the size. Which one would you prefer, right? You change a color or something like that. And like for me, if I have lots and lots of overlaps and there's like kind of a big scatter plot, maybe transparency is the right one, because as the overlap becomes more and more, it becomes darker and darker, and you can just intuitively look at it and go, look at that spot there, what happened over there. Now, if you have less data, the transparency becomes less cool, right? So really depends on your data, how you present it. And I think you just know what are your options, and you play with it and you feel it out, and you kind of make some rules. But we don't have as like hard and fast rules out there. And if everyone knows, you just put your data in, you kind of hope that Excel is giving you the right output. Sometimes it's kind of like what? Wait, I'm missing a whole month of data. How did this happen? It's a scary moment when stuff like that happens.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So the chart aficionados who might be listening to this are probably saying you're just outlining the rationale for using the standard acceleration chart by going through that some of those decision-making criteria. So I don't want to belabor the point too much.
I don't know how you get everyone over to it. You know, you'd have to have buy-in from the BACB. If that's not in, then you're kind of SOL, right? So, like I like the acceleration chart. I think it's great. I think that, you know, we can prove that kids can do it. You can train anyone, you know, young enough to do it. I think that the difficulty becomes that just as the education issue that, you know, that people face, like why weren't teachers buying into behavior analytic teachings about education? It's about like response effort, something new, and kind of just maintenance. Like there's going to be some issues. Like if you don't love it, you don't love it. You got to get some buy-in. You got to get some training. You got to get them to experience the benefits, maybe the long-term benefits that need to be experienced. But, you know, I think it's a very cool graph. I think when we get some more apps out there, I think that might be the way that it shifts the tide to use, you know, because make it easy.
Yeah, for sure. Agreed. All right. So worms.
Worms.
What's the deal with worms?
What's the deal? Well, you know, I'm a bit counter control, and I was in a human operant lab, so I had to do something with worms. It just seemed like I had to. And the cool thing is, like, Wayne always tried to teach me, how do you link this stuff all together? That you don't want to be like that flotsam and jetsam. How do you put your work together? And so everything kind of becomes a post hoc rationalization. I say that the worm stuff there's no IACUC, which means there's no review for these animals to do research with them. Anything without a spine is fine. It's good to go. Octopus, hydra, you know, jellyfish, starfish, you can have your fun. You know, cockroaches, shrimp, you know, crawfish, have your fun. You do what you want. Behaviorize the bejesus out of it with care and consideration and all ethical considerations given. Just because you don't have someone over your shoulder doesn't mean you shouldn't find ways to be caring, compassionate. But my worm, the Planaria, is a cephalized worm. That means it's got a head, it's got a trunk, it's got a tail. So it's got a segmented body. It's got eyes, googly eyes, but it's got eyes. It's got the brain. It makes it more related in terms of the evolutionary history to humans than like the earthworm, for example. One of the cool things about this worm, its regenerative powers are amazing. It can regrow every part of its body, including the brain. So you cut it in half, it's going to regrow its head, and the tail section is going to grow its head, and the head section is going to regrow its tail. Why does this matter to behavior people, right? Well, what if you trained a worm? Would the memory be retained to both the head section and the tail section post-regeneration? And that became a question in the 60s, and McConnell was the guy that kind of did this research. So this biologist, James McConnell, is actually targeted by the Unabomber. He actually lost his hearing, or his graduate student lost his hearing from the Unabomber, because his research was so controversial. It started off with him doing some conditioning experiments using light and shock, and demonstrating that using light as the neutral stimulus, which later becomes an unconditioned stimulus, a weak US, which is one of the attacks that later happened on his work. Using light as the neutral stimulus and then shock as the unconditioned stimulus, he got worms conditioned to the light, at higher intensities in terms of turns and contractions. And so turns that could be defined as kind of smaller arcs, and contractions are kind of a U-shaped arc, because they don't have many opportunities to do much behavior beside turns going towards food or chemical gradients. But this worm is sensitive to gravity, chemical gradients, acid, light, heat, infrared, ultraviolet. It's just the amount of things this thing is sensitive to, which makes working with this worm very difficult. Like vibration, like if you press a button and that's a light, but it could be jostling, your experimental chamber, you could have compound stimulus being presented. So working with this worm is no easy task. So the idea here is I looked at these studies and I looked at his data and it looked pretty good. Then it comes to his studies on cannibalization and memory transfer. And so he first posits, hey, you cut it in half, this conditioned response that I trained retains to both the head and tail sections, right? Some studies come out to say, hey, you didn't have enough controls here, but later studies seem to support McConnell's study. Even molecular biological research supports this memory retention across the planaria for both potentially head and tail sections, at least in respondent conditioning. Then a study comes out with cannibalization of the planarian. So you trains a proper planaria. There's something that naive planaria don't do in a respondent conditioning paradigm, that turn flexion stuff. And then he grinds them up and feeds them to another worm, and then that worm somehow has the training. And so this blew the scientific community up. They were really angry at him because this is some sci-fi, this is Planaria Man comic book kind of what the bejesus is going on here. How is this working, right? And he got a lot of attack. And so I sympathized with his position because I was like, we've been under attack, Like John Hopkins right now is doing hallucinogenic research and therapy, right? And
I heard about that.
That whole genre of research has some really prolific, cool stuff coming out of it, but then it gets suppressed. And it's like, it doesn't mean that stuff was non-functional. So I like those kind of things. Like I can empathize with, substantial evidence is required for substantial claims. That's a given, right? But I saw some issues with the cannibalization study. So my goal was just to do an assay, try to get some training that could be operant. I won't go as far to say it's definitively operant, so that we can do some more studies on this and ascertain if memory, what is memory, right? Like when we use the term memory, it's a loaded terminology. I think of learned behavior, but there's probably metabolic memory. There's respondent conditioning, operant conditioning, combinations. You've got you've got higher order operant for us and long-term delayed, kind of stuff with verbal rule governance. That's kind of seems like separate categories to a degree, right? Depending on which perspective you take. But if we look at this organism and we examine and we find out an arbitrary operant isn't retained, or it's only retained in the head, that says something about memory transfer and the biological mechanisms for respondent conditioning, operant conditioning. There's differentiation. And there's big debates about, should we have a unified theory for respondent and operant? Is respondent conditioning a prerequisite for operant conditioning? Because you do need to have primary reinforcers and those kind of that conditionability to have potential reinforcers, higher order stuff. And I had a presentation which I where people think respondent conditioning is simple, but someone could spend their whole life on a pigeon peck, for water versus food. Look at the difference in auto-shaping cues on that, and that could be someone's research. And how does that work in terms of the grand scheme of things? Well, that could relate directly to memory. If a pigeon's initial response for water is different, and that precedes what they're going to get, that behavior change into a commitment response that leads to this is probably for water, right? Or this is going to be for water based on the SD that, this is the SD here. I'm going to peck like this for that. And then here's water coming up. So, there's so many cool things in behavior analysis right now. And that just seemed like a fun topic. And how do I relate that to skills that for the field at large? Well, we have EAB right now. We have less and less pigeon labs, less and less rat labs. It's going to be more, difficult for us to get those experiences out to students. And invertebrate research, Dixon's lab's doing cockroaches, Abrahamson's lab's doing honeybees, Brady Phelps is doing Planaria over, they're all doing these cool stuff and they're giving these experiences. And some people think it's formative in how they think, how they're analytic, and how their behavior analytic skills came about. So I think there's value. I think that going through that kind of experience where you're not tethered to like the social outcome. You're excited for the behavior for the sake of the behavior. It's in the purest sense, I guess, the most functionally entwined you could be for like what you're doing, with the least problems in terms of doing the wrong treatment because a parent, is praising you to do something differently,
Yeah.
So
what's interesting is I don't know if you Ryan O'Donnell was on the show many shows ago, and he talked about one of his formative experiences in graduate schools working with fish conditioning.
Oh yeah, with Fisher's Lab.
Yeah. He found that experience really, really helpful. And he spent a few minutes talking about how difficult it is to shape up those repertoires and how precise you have to be and all that stuff. And it definitely is an educational tool for sure.
Yeah, and I think it brings you a lot of, I dare say, empathy to the organism's, biological makeup. If you've got working with a lateral line, movement from like your hand is basically hearing. That is the different because the medium of water is pushing, like the lateral line, and it's reflexes to move very quickly away. So, yeah, like like people think like, oh, well, you can't, we use reinforcement. It's so simple. Well, we use different stimuli for different organisms. Like, like pigeons are great for seeing things, and rats are great for olfactory cues. So you can like slice more naturalistic contingencies, knowing more about the organism's biological makeup. I think it's formative, and like I think if you look at the history of the service of ABA, it's usually service delivery, ABA, EAB, and each of them feed into each other. And if one is suffering, the other suffers, right? If one outgrows and doesn't like remember that errorless learning came from pigeon research, like if you don't take that, like those, there are some discoveries from ABA that go into EAB, but the majority of discoveries came from EAB to ABA, and that might upset parents, but this isn't a parent podcast, so we should be honest.
Sure. I do have my share of parents who do listen to this, but I think by this point in time, they're pretty much bought in. That's something that I don't mean to keep pumping past episodes here, but that topic has come up.
Please do, because then they go over to someone else, and like then they don't have to listen to me to dribble on.
Well, when I talked with Matt Normand a few episodes ago, that was one of his concerns for the field, is like the dwindling basic research labs that are out there, and it's certainly where I got my start in behavior analysis was, moving pigeons between their cages and
me too.
Putting them in operant chambers and pressing start, on the computer keyboard.
Did you have one of them that attacked you? Like, was there one that always attacked you?
Yeah, of course. 100%. Yeah. There was always, like a mean bastard of a pigeon.
Yeah.
And then there was always ones that were very, docile and everything else. And to get them from point A to point B, I remember at the University of New Hampshire, the room where the cages, there was like this climate controlled room where the cages were, and it was like way down the hallway from where the actual lab was. So you had to, carry them, and it was just a complete pain in the butt. But there was a wide variation in temperament. Let's just put it that way, for sure.
The worst thing to be was in a hangover in that room. That was the worst. That's the worst place to be. The smells in that room, and just like.
It's not good.
Never forget that.
It's not a good place, for sure.
My theory on tequila and hangovers is this: that tequila is just so very different in terms of the taste of that compared to the other alcohols, which might blend closer. That's why if you do have like, if you do have like sickness, the Garcia effect takes place with the more novel tasting stimuli. So that's why everyone's like, tequila. If you have a bad time with that, you're not going to have tequila again.
I see. Unfortunately, I don't.
Good tell.
I don't. Tequila's not on my list. Not for that reason. It's just not, not a taste I prefer. But I could see how that would.
You're protected.
Yes. So what sort of things are you? So, what's on the docket as it relates to your work going forward? What are you psyched about doing now?
Yeah. So I've been very lucky.
I know you got these awesome grants come down the pipeline. So that's obviously one.
Yeah, like I've been very lucky, like in terms of like that funding. We're going to need people to beta test that app before it goes to the market. So we'd love to like use your listeners to be able to like see if we've got something that they would use and give us feedback, just like you get feedback from your listeners about what areas you can improve in your podcast. That's kind of, we need some sampling, and the people that like behavior analysis already might be like kind of kicked and psyched to just tell me, what they would want changes in, to have some successful app out in the Google Play Store or the Apple Store. So that's one thing. Right now, I'm an educator over at Cincinnati, University of Cincinnati. I teach online. I'm with a really cool school psychology program just next door to us. One of the things I think the field needs to look at is diversity training, and get into like building a system, a framework that helps people to look at our research a bit more comprehensively. Because there was a paper out by Anita and Al Polling's lab about the reporting standards of behavior analysis research, and whether demographics are even included, right? Like it's scary if we're not putting demographics in our data to know if there's any cultural assessment variables. So I think that's something that I want to like look at, especially like I'm Indian. I came from England. Like my mom was born in Uganda. She was kicked out of Africa when Idi Amin took place. She came to England as a refugee. My dad was born in Guyana in South America. I'm not quite Indian. I'm not quite English. I'm not quite American. Like I've got the colonial hate of my own self in me. Like I kind of I came here and I'm like, wait, we actually, they don't like this July 4th. We what is that date? I don't understand. Like, there's like this moment where you're like, oh, we celebrate Guy Fawkes Day, the retention of the monarchy, by blowing up, where Guy Fawkes tried to blow up the Houses of Parliament and he was stopped. We have the inverse celebration on November 5th or 4th or something.
That's right.
So, and
it's a little V for Vendetta reference, right?
Yeah. Yeah, they burn an effigy of him, and like no one thinks anything of a burning effigy of a person. You just grow up in like George Orwell's like a group think 1984 doublethink moment, and you're like, well, that's just normal, but just burn a person. But damn, with Guy Fawkes, thank God King James lived. To come over here, you're like, the one thing I loved about America, it's like I like found a cowboy in me, like the freedom. Like I was like, you can do this here, you can speak out of turn, you can break rules. This is amazing.
That's right.
Freedom!
Well, you talked about counter control earlier. Yeah, this is right up your alley.
Yeah. This I was so rigid. Like I coming from England, like I was all very rule governed, and then I got a lot more flexible, and I was very excited to push the boundaries, feel it out. So I think that
and you went to Florida too. Let's be honest.
Yeah. That really, I went to an all boys school too. Like so, coming from like all boys school straight into Florida, and you're like, there are girls, they exist, they're amazing. Like it's like it's cool. It's like a wake up call. It's like
I see. Yeah, I was talking more about like the kind of anything happens, or like there's all those like
anything happens will happen.
That's right. All those Florida memes, that you see. Yeah. Anyway, cool. Well, I think we probably should put a cap on this before we get.
No, Matt. There is no. You can't stop me again. Don't put a rule on me.
That's right. There I go again.
Looking for a topic now. I'm looking for a topic we can go on. Diversity. We did ratio distance. Yeah, we did. We did some. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. All right. Yeah. I really appreciate the time and letting me kind of just spew out whatever comes to mind. But I'm really glad the field's in a place of growth, and I'm glad that we have the BACB. I think we've got a lot of growth to do, and I'm sure this ABAI, there's going to be a lot more diversity talks, cultural competence, for behavior analysts. I think is going to be a big thing. I think we're going to look at. There's a cool article by Ben Witz about gift giving and cultural assessments, and kind of, do you take a picture from a kid? Is that a gift? And the rigid stance is, it's just the rigid stance might be a bit culturally insensitive, if you will.
Oh, well, undoubtedly, yeah. I mean, there's so many examples of that, and the thing that surprises me is why those things are still controversial. It's like common sense should rule the day with a lot of those things. But anyway. Very cool. One last question. So what are you telling your students who are graduating, your newly minted BCBAs, for advice?
I told them, look,
play Halo. Play Halo.
Don't do work. No, I say you've got to go ahead and reach out to people. And if you have an interest, you have something that you like, don't just float around and, be indecisive. Like, I waste a lot of time doing another master's program, wasting 2 years for nothing, and not like I didn't volunteer to do research for, I did the pigeon lab, I did the pigeon stuff, but I didn't kind of put my hand down on something, and I try to be a master of too many things, I think. And so I think you find something you like, find a specialized area, and get someone to mentor you. Reach out to people in the field, read their papers, and they will reach back out to you. This is a moment of growth where, if you want to know about resurgence, reach out to Claire St. Peter. If you want to know about gambling, reach out to Matt Costello and Rider University. If you want to do translational research, reach out to Thomas Critchfield. If you want to do exercise research, Matt Norman's doing it, Jesse Dowry's doing it, Wendy Donlan's doing it, Christine Hughes, Erin Rasmussen. So those people are going to be great contacts, right?
And I can second that, because I've been really surprised. I mean, I used to be surprised. I'm not surprised anymore, but there's a reason why the author's email address are on those papers.
Yeah.
They want you. They would be super psyched if you email them.
They don't get that many emails about their papers.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, you don't even know. The worm stuff gets me more contacts than a lot of my other stuff. Isn't that the weirdest thing? Someone from England contacted me. Someone who's doing a PhD philosophy degree contacted me about the worm stuff. And that paper just went out recently. It's that's so strange. And I'm really grateful to talk to them about they're well, what about other organisms like Hydra, Planaria, axolotls, and zebrafish? Axolotls, they can do brain transplants, but they can't do full regrowth of their brain. So it's you get to chat with people, and they're grateful for it. And I'm an online professor. I'm exceptionally grateful for it, because I don't always get that super interaction level.
Yeah, for sure. All right, cool. Great advice to end the show with, Neil. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much. And, guys, feel free if you're interested in this stuff, if you want to be on a listserv to get, a beta version of the app, let me know. We'll be grateful for any kind of user feedback.
Great. And we'll have how people can contact you in the show notes of this episode.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much, Matt. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate the Behavioral Observation podcast. It just means that we're growing too. That's another reason why I like these podcasts.
Yeah. It's fun. It's fun. Awesome. Thanks a lot, man.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Behavioral Observations podcast with Matt Sikoria. You can find Matt's notes on this episode at www.behavioralobservations.com. We also invite you to stay connected with us on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations and on Twitter at Behavior Podcast.